This is episode 5 of the Shame Proof Your Life podcast, the one where I talk about my dad. I'm your host and shame coach, Danita Bremer. In this podcast, I tell stories from my life to fulfill a prompting I've had for far too long. I help you tell your story in a way that you see you aren't alone and there's nothing wrong with you. I want you to stop believing the lie you aren't enough so you can live a life of freedom and fulfillment the way God intended. Okay, so I got pretty emotional just outlining this episode. So I apologize if this is emotional or raw. I do aim to be vulnerable here, but even sometimes it's a little much for me. So today I want to talk about my dad. He is in the backdrop of my childhood. He's an important part of that, but also there's a lot of pain surrounding my relationship with him. First of all, I want to start with loving my dad. He is an amazing person. He's hardworking. He's a simple man. He can fall asleep pretty much anywhere. And I mostly remember him sleeping on the floor, just falling asleep because he was tired. He loves animals, has such a tender heart. One time he went hunting and he described the situation and he said, I had him in my sights, but I just couldn't pull the trigger. Growing up, he was always whistling and drumming on his body. He genuinely used his body as an instrument. When I was really young, probably 8 or so and younger, he was like my hero. I remember one time, probably on a Saturday, we went for a hike. It was either spring or summer. And it was my mom and my dad and my sister and myself. And we went on a hike just behind my grandparents' house. And we got to this point where there was a dead end and kind of a steep slope, like a rocky, like shale rock, loose rock slope. And my mom wanted to go back the way we came, backtrack. And my dad was like, oh, it's fine. I'll just slide down this slope with Danita on my shoulders and my sister on his lap. And, I'll just carry them down and we'll get down a lot faster. And what happened, that's exactly what he did, but we got going a little too fast and he had to put his arms out to slow us down. And by the time we got to the bottom of this slope, his hands were full of blood. Like his hands had been cut several times trying to slow himself down and protect us girls. I remember one time, now looking back, I realize this isn't really that big of a deal, but one time my grandfather was leaving to go into town or something, and my grandparents had a fairly long driveway, and my grandma was like, oh, shoot, I forgot to tell him something. And so my dad ran after the car and caught up to the car. And I was very young, and I remember thinking, wow, he can run as fast as a car. And another time, I've mentioned my grandparents built their house and they had a balcony, like a large wraparound balcony around the main level of their house. And it wasn't quite finished yet. So it didn't have the railings. And so my grandparents would always tell us to stay away from the edge. And one time we were all just sitting up there chatting or whatever. And all of a sudden, my dad, I think he was like laying on his stomach and he just grabbed the edge of the balcony and then swung down and dropped down. And as a little kid, I was like, whoa, that's awesome. So I definitely held him in like hero status in my mind for many years. He is a really fun person. He was definitely the fun parent of my parents. And before I turned 6, when we lived in Southern California, we would often go to Disneyland or the San Diego Zoo or SeaWorld. He loved animals, especially sea creatures, fish, and any kind of sea creature. And he taught me a lot. As I was preparing for this episode, I realized that some of my most important values come from my dad. He taught me how to swim. He taught me what the Milky Way was. He taught me to love and appreciate nature. I remember being 5 or 6 years old, and he would let me climb up on his lap while he was driving, and I got to steer, and, he made me feel so mature. And he taught me things like, "Don't borrow money, and if you have to borrow money, pay it back as soon as possible." He taught me when I was struggling in middle school or high school, feeling like an outcast, that popular people don't always stay popular. And I have seen his wisdom in that. And he was there during a conversation. I was on the phone with him when I passed the phone to my now husband, who was at the time just a friend of mine. And they chatted a little bit on the phone. I think we were like confirming some bet or something like that. And my friend passed the phone back, and my dad said, "You're going to marry that guy." And I was like, "No, dad, he's just a friend. I already have a boyfriend, right?" But he was right. I married that guy. So, like I said, my dad is a great guy. He, I think, actually had, for being a high school dropout, a lot of wisdom, life experience. And for all those reasons and more, I love him. Yeah, guys, I told you, I warned you I would get emotional on this one. But after my teenage years and into adulthood, there were a lot of difficult things that happened. And I remember looking at a picture that I have of my dad as a kindergartner and realizing that he is a child of God just like I am. And then I had him in my mind on this pedestal. And perhaps it was time to take him down. And I reflected on that and I thought, if my dad and I were the same age, I probably wouldn't like him very much. He is argumentative, he's arrogant, he's always promising and talking about things he's going to do someday and literally never doing them. And he really only had 4 states of being when I was growing up: asleep, angry, sad, or laughing. Of course, laughing dad was always the best, the most fun, and angry dad was scary, and sad dad was sad. I realized as I looked at that picture, and I'll put the picture in the show notes, that picture of my dad as a kindergartner, that sometimes you love people, but you don't like them, and that is okay. I remember a moment with my dad. I think I was about 7 years old, and we had been swimming at the local lake in the town where I grew up. There was a lake with a state park there, and that was one of our favorite places over the summers to just hang out there and picnic and swim. And we had packed up for the day, and it was late afternoon, wasn't quite sunset time yet. And my dad was standing at the water's edge, and I walked up next to him, and I was standing on his right side, and he was just looking out at the water, and he loved the water. he grew up in Western Washington state, where it's very mild weather, very wet and rainy. He grew up on an island in the Puget Sound. And so he was always drawn to the water. And he was standing there smoking a cigarette and just looking out over the water. And I stood next to him, and I think maybe I was telling him, we're ready to go. The car's all packed up or something like that. And he was like, okay. And he dropped his cigarette from his mouth to his side, and the tip of the cigarette touched the back of my hand, and it burnt me. And he felt bad. He apologized immediately. And I was like, oh, it's not a big deal. Even as a kid, I kind of was like shaking it off. But I had a scar on my hand for many years after that. And it was a total accident. And as I was outlining this episode, I just put down accidental burn. And I thought, yeah, that's kind of how my relationship with my dad is. Seems like everything is an accidental burn. In my teen years, now as I look back and I kind of see developmentally, this is probably very appropriate for both a father and a daughter, but we definitely grew apart. He would always complain about me. My parents would argue about me and how much time I was spending with friends or at home, or did I do my chores and things like that. And just like his relationship with my mom was very hot and cold, it seemed like he always either was head over heels in love with her or hated her. And same for her. She was the same toward my dad. I'm not blaming him or anything like that, but it was very hot, cold relationship. And I think I adopted that dynamic with my dad as well. So as a teenager, I really pulled away from him and did not like to be around him. And there were a few instances, a few specific moments in time that, as I think about those years, seem to characterize them. The first one was, I don't remember how old I was, but it was my birthday. I think it was my 15th birthday. And we had a favorite lake that we would go to during the summers and hang out, different lake than the state park. And we went to this lake for my birthday, and we hung out there all day long, and it was fun and it was warm. And, my mom, my dad, my sisters, my cousins, my aunt, uncle, I think there were some friends of the family that came to hang out with us as well. And it was a fun day. And we packed up and got everything ready to go home. And again, dad standing there next to the water's edge, smoking a cigarette. And I went up to him and stood next to him. And then one of his friends came, and they were chatting or whatever. And I was just standing there. And somehow it came up that that day was my birthday. And his friend said, "Oh, it's her birthday?" And I had been in my bathing suit all day long. We were ready to go home. I was in my clothes. And he was like, "Oh, well, we got to throw her in the lake." And I was like, "No, no, I do not want to be thrown in the lake." And he kind of like this friend, I don't honestly, in my memory, I don't even remember who it was. But this friend kind of looked to my dad and asked like permission, and like a look passed between them. And my dad was like, "I don't care." And his stupid friend grabbed me and threw me into the lake fully clothed and dry. And I was livid. I was so mad at my dad for that, that he would let his friend do that to me. Another memory comes up of my parents fighting. And at this point, I think I'm 16 or 17 years old. Actually, I might have been younger than that, but my parents were fighting, and they were fighting about me. They were fighting about, I don't know, how much time I was spending with my friends and how I didn't want to be home, and whether or not I did chores or something. And it was late at night, and I couldn't sleep because they were fighting and arguing with each other, and I felt so bad that they're fighting about me, and yet I'm not even there, right? And I decided to get up and insert myself into the conversation. And so I got up and I walked into the living room and I started, I don't know, defending myself, defending my mom. I don't remember exactly what I said, but my dad was very angry and he walked over to me and he tried to slap me across the face. And I saw it coming and I moved and he missed. And I looked at him in the eyes and I said, "You will never touch me again." And I meant it. And he walked away. Listen, every girl loves her dad or wants to, but not every dad deserves that love. And you can insert whatever relationship that is difficult for you in your life. My dad chose a life of drugs and alcohol and drama. And I do not respect him for that. As an adult and a woman who has had to make my own way in the world, I will always love my dad, but I do not like him. I do not like the person he is. And I know I'm not the only one with strained relationships with your parents. And it's okay. Really, truly, it's okay. It's okay to love someone and not to like them. It's okay to love someone and not have a relationship with them. And sometimes that is the way. I just find so much comfort in the stories in the Book of Mormon, especially the story of Nephi and Lehi. And Nephi was instructed to run from his own brother. For a long time, I felt bad about not liking my family. And one day I was studying in the scriptures and I realized that there are many instances of family not having good relationships and that it's okay. It's almost just the way of life sometimes. Of course, we want to have good relationships with our families, but it's not always in everyone's best interest. What I have learned in this situation is that compassion is a powerful tool. As I think about my dad and I look at him as a child of God, I have so much compassion for him. I know his life wasn't easy. And I also know that part of the reason why his life wasn't easy was because of the choices he made. And I don't blame him for those choices. But when I'm thinking about being compassionate, I don't forget myself in that picture. I also have so much compassion for myself as a young child, for myself as a teenager, learning who she was in the world and her role and her place. I have so much compassion for myself as a young adult and as a young mother. It's not that I have given up on my dad, and he is welcome in my home anytime. I love him. I respect him in so many ways, but not in all the ways. And I am okay with that. That helps me figure out who I want to be in the world. I don't have any journaling exercises for you today. I just want to tell you this one message, which is it's okay to love someone and not like them. And honestly, it's okay to not love them as well. Sometimes we need that. We need to distance ourselves to take care of ourselves. And every single person, this is going to be a different, it's going to be different for everyone. I can't tell you who to love and who to like and who not to love and who not to like. But what I can tell you is that all of it is okay. We don't need to feel guilty about it and we don't need to beat ourselves up about it. I would